The next item on this afternoon's agenda is a statement by the Vice President of the Commission, High Representative of the EU for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, on Iran and Iran's nuclear programme. I'll give the floor, first of all, to the Baroness Ashton. Go ahead, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. President, very much. As we've already touched upon in question hour, the issue of the Iranian nuclear programme is of great concern for all of the European Union and for the international community as a whole. And colleagues have already mentioned the fact that at the Foreign Affairs Council on the 23rd of January, we discussed the issue in the context of agreeing new sanctions. As I indicate on all occasions, we are committed to maintaining this pressure on the Iranian authorities to comply with their international obligations. And it's a key element of the the twin-track approach, along with the E3+3 process, which, as you are aware, I lead. We've had several UN Security Council resolutions, but in spite of them, Iran continues to violate its obligations. It does not cooperate fully with the IAEA, and it accelerates the expansion of its nuclear programme. In early January, it started operations to enrich uranium to a level of near 20% at the underground facility at Qom, a site controlled by the military. Honourable members know that for a number of years, serious concerns have been expressed concerning the lack of cooperation from Iran to resolve these outstanding issues, including those that point to the military dimension of its nuclear programme. The IAEA report of November 2011 presented findings on their activities relating to the developments of military nuclear technology. On that basis, the Board of Governors adopted by overwhelming majority a resolution that expressed increasing concern on the Iranian nuclear programme. The work that we do, I hope, demonstrates our commitment to efforts aimed at achieving a diplomatic solution to the Iranian nuclear issue, the second part of the twin track. Now, I've written to Dr. Jalili, my counterpart, setting out proposals which would allow Iran to draw benefits in the nuclear, political and economic field. But despite reminders, I have so far received no response to proposals that would enter into a confidence-building process based on reciprocity and a step-by-step approach. We've always expressed our readiness to address, in the framework of confidence building, other issues of concern which may be of interest for Iran, for example, cooperation in the area of counter-narcotics. I take every opportunity to reiterate this message to the Iranian side, most recently in my discussions with Foreign Minister Salehi, and in parallel by using my contacts with third countries, particularly Turkey, to pass the message to Iran that the door remains open for negotiations through this confidence-building process, which could be launched as soon as Iran demonstrates its readiness to do so. So it's against that approach that the Council adopted further measures. It was an important step. It showed EU unity and EU leadership. These measures are designed to specifically and significantly affect Iran's financial capacity to pursue that nuclear programme by curtailing its revenue from crude oil exports. The sanctions on oil are of particular significance because of their effect on the revenue of the Iranian government. Oil exports count for about 80% of Iran's exports and 70% of government revenues. The EU imports amount to 20% of Iran's oil exports. So by specifically targeting this important source of revenue, we are strongly increasing the pressure on the Iranian government, whilst avoiding, as far as we possibly can, negative effects on the Iranian population. Honourable members, we don't stand alone in this. UN sanctions continue to be in force. On the 31st of December, the United States decided to strengthen further its sanctions against Iran, targeting in particular the Iranian financial system and revenues from different sources, including from oil exports. We now need to convince as many as we can of like-minded countries, in particular those who import Iranian oil, to take similar steps and consider reducing their import of that oil. This will maximise the effect of the sanctions. The prohibition is done in a phased manner, allowing us to adjust to the new situation, and a review has been built in to take stock of the effect of the measure in the course of the coming months and, of course, address any problems that may arise. By doing so, we have ensured that the EU and Member States will be able to have the time and means to adjust and ensure the continuity of their energy supplies. Finally, I just want to mention that we also continue to have grave concerns about the human rights situation in Iran. This relates in particular to ongoing oppression of the political opposition, but also the increasing use and excessive application of the death penalty. In reaction to the repression and the dramatic increase in executions there has been since last April an EU sanctions regime against Iran addressing the human rights situation. It targets specifically those people complicit in or responsible for these grave human rights violations. And since they were strengthened in October, they now include 61 people. A prohibition on the supply of equipment that could be used for repression is also part of our sanctions. So, honourable members, I believe that what we are doing is the right approach, continuing our pressure on Iran, continuing to push for negotiations, and I look forward very much to hearing from honourable members on this issue.
Thank you very much, Baroness Ashton. Και τώρα το λόγο έχουν οι ομιλητές.
Now we come on to political group spokesmen, and I'll give the floor on behalf of the European People's Party to Mr. Salafranca for 2 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. President. Madam High Representative, Vice President, colleagues, the 23rd of December Council took a difficult but sensible decision, and we are going to back, I'm sure, those conclusions in the resolution we are voting tomorrow. It's difficult, as you've explained, because sacrifices are going to be required by various member states, and we've heard observations by the Prime Ministers of France and the UK, as well as President Sarkozy, saying they will not allow Iran to equip itself with nuclear weapons. But we need to give primacy to dialogue, to try to get Iran back to the negotiating table, to make sure that it opens up to IAEA representatives, and also to mute the war drums which can be heard at the moment. One of the possible candidates for the US presidency has said that the US needs to move quickly in this area. We need to remember that we need Iranian oil more than they need anything that we can give them, and the possible closing of the Straits of Hormuz could make it difficult for fuel to reach Europe and worsen an already difficult economic situation. So I'd like to say, Lady Ashton, that over and above the internal dimension and the consistency which the Council showed on the 23rd of January, it's important that we act in concert with our allies. You've said that you've been to India, Japan and other countries. Their position is vital if the measures we adopt do have the desired effect. Thank you very much, Mr. President. On behalf of the S&D group in the European Parliament, I give the floor to Mrs. MUÑIZ de Urquiza for 2 minutes as well, please. Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Lady Ashton. Iran is going to be a crucial element in 2012. It's going to continue its role as a global destabilizer and a regional destabilizer, and will continue to cloak its nuclear program in secrecy, and at the same time, of course, being the third largest exporter of crude oil. Oil, of course, provides 80% of Iran's income, and that might be a way we can act, make our sanctions effective. although Israel and the Republicans in the US are trying to escalate this in what we think is an excessive way, my group wants to rule out military action explicitly. We want to go on with your two-track approach: proportionate standards, sanctions, I beg your pardon, and making sure that they are targeted so that the people of Iran are not affected. We also need, of course, to use the second track, diplomacy, Madam High Representative. We need to make sure that there are rigorous checks carried out by the International Atomic Energy Agency and that Iran goes along with all of the safeguard measures that the IAEA can impose on enriched uranium for civil purposes, as is allowed under the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. As you said, your letter to the Iranian negotiator back in October, that means that Iran doesn't have to stop enriching completely for dialogue to take place. We have the IAEA inspectors monitoring production by Iran, and we need to have that, and we need to have a broader and more ambitious agenda as far as our relations with Iran are concerned. Thank you. Mrs. Schaake, for the Liberal Group, for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, President, High Representative, dear colleagues. Iran replied to the most recent EU sanctions with surprise. Surprise not only mentioned by officials, but also reflected in the further decline of the value of the currency, as the EU remained united in its sanction package of January 23rd. The EU is strong when it stands united and leads, as you said, High Representative. Let's see more of it. However, isolating Iran is no success or goal as such. The ALDE Group urges you to work with Turkey and other partners to do everything possible to use all diplomatic means available to encourage Iranian officials to engage in meaningful negotiations over the nuclear issue. This also means looking into different ways in which Iran might be persuaded, not only at sanctions. The EU should also look at a permanent representation in Iran and eventually to open an EU representation on the ground, to also more directly relay our joint concerns with human rights violations, besides our vital role in the E3+3 negotiations. And may I remind especially some members on the conservative side of this House that sanctions are an ultimate means and not a goal in and of themselves. I'm proud and glad the EU has always clearly distinguished between seeking to impact individuals with responsibilities for either the nuclear program or human rights violations, and not the Iranian population. They, after all, feel largely unrepresented by their political, military or religious leaders. It's therefore even more important that the EU acts independently of the United States, especially in an election year. The US has consistently chosen different sanction packages than the EU, but the US sanctions also impact EU businesses by imposing not only direct but also indirect sanctions. And I believe food and medicine should always be able to reach the Iranian people. And one last point is of particular importance for the people in Iran, especially the young generation, and that is the role that technologies can play in either enhancing or threatening human rights. And I believe the EU should take its responsibility and ensure that no repressive technologies are exported to such repressive regimes. And this we can do now without controversy.
Mrs. Schaake. Someone's shown a blue card. Mr. Tannock, would you agree to take the question from him?
Tannock.
Madam Schaake made a specific reference to the conservative side of the House believing in sanctions for their own sake. Well, first of all, could she actually explain whom she means by the conservatives? Does she mean my group, DCR? And whatever makes her think that we would be in favour of sanctions just for their own sake? Sanctions have to be imposed with a political objective in mind. And I'll speak about that in my speech in a few minutes' time. But I just wondered if she could elucidate what she meant by that.
Mr. Tannock, I meant to distinguish between specific members who are keen on imposing sanctions, and the European People's Party has asked for a split vote in a text that is also before this House tomorrow, which seeks to have a consistent EU approach to repressive regimes, in which we clearly state that the EU does not impose sanctions in order to target entire populations, but rather to address individuals. And I think that text is appropriate, and I regret the fact that there are apparently some people on the conservative side of this House, relative to where my group stands, who seek to talk about sanctions as a whole, instead of making that important distinction, which I'm glad you'll make as well.
Ms. Kronberg, on behalf of the European United Left, for 3.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Green Group expresses its great concerns over the tense situation in the Gulf region and supports the new EU sanctions towards Iran. Many of us are, however, also very concerned of their possible negative effects on the Iranian population. The Parliament's opinion has always been that there cannot be a military solution to a nuclear conflict with Iran. We should not leave any ambiguity about this question, and the Greens have proposed an amendment to this effect. The EU has a dual-track approach to sanctions and negotiations. Sanctions have been enforced, now it's time for negotiations. The question is, how can we open up for negotiations? The Iranians have said they are willing, and I think one of the things that has to be accepted by the EU is that the Iranians will not suspend all uranium enrichment as a precondition for sanctions. So we strongly urge all parties to negotiate seriously and without preconditions. Iran and the West have taken turns in rejecting each other's offers for compromise, and several opportunities have been missed because the phases of goodwill between E3+3 and Iran were not synchronized. I hope this will not be the case in the future. We would like to see also Turkey and Brazil involved in the negotiations. They were proposing compromises in this respect and would be good partners to be included. If we manage to continue negotiation, it could then open a new historical window to the nuclear weapon-free Middle East. The EU should support actively this UN conference and be helpful in setting a roadmap for this process. The Greens think that the EU should also show a good example and give up nuclear energy, as Germany has decided. The example of Iran clearly shows there is no way to clearly separate nuclear activities for civilian uses and the use of the same technologies for military aims. As a goodwill gesture showing the EU's readiness for dialogue, we should finally open a EU representation in Tehran, and Iran should receive security guarantees, as it is very difficult to bring a country to the negotiating table under a permanent threat of war.
Our next speaker is Mr. Tannock on behalf of the European Conservatives and Reformist Group, and he has 2 minutes.
Mr. President, Iran's nuclear military ambitions and its government's constant refusal to engage with the IAEA and UN Security Council demands constitutes a major threat to global security. It also poses a potential risk to peace in the Middle East, with an existential threat to the State of Israel in particular. It's also likely to lead to a regional arms race, with neighbouring Gulf countries such as Saudi Arabia also wishing to acquire such nuclear weapons if Iran is allowed to possess one, in breach of its NPT international legal obligations. We must now all hope the measures agreed by the European Union, even with political support from countries like Greece, Spain and Italy, who are large importers of Iranian oil, that this will put economic pressure on the regime and make it much harder for the leadership to move money around the world and force Tehran to come back to the negotiating table. It shows that when there is a clear and urgent need for action, the EU does not always dither and dodge the issue. This is Europe speaking as one voice for once on the most serious global threat, and I would encourage Iran to start listening. And it should, of course, also show, traditionally Iran should also showcase the legacy of its glorious Persian culture. Instead, it's sadly one of the most brutal theocratic dictatorships in the world, having suppressed all opposition to the last flawed presidential elections, and a country which carries out shocking public executions of homosexuals, those guilty of so-called sexual misdemeanours, including minors, as well as exporting terrorism via its proxies, such as Hezbollah, to neighbouring countries. It also regularly interferes in neighbouring countries from Bahrain to military propping up of the Syrian Ba'athist dictatorship. All the more reason, therefore, why it must never become a nuclear power. Or further options to prevent this should be excluded from the negotiations. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mrs. Ernst, on behalf of the Confederal Group of the European United Left, Nordic Green Left. You have the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, recent EU sanctions do not exactly give rise to credibility, it's just saber-rattling. If we want to get Iran to compromise, I think we are deceiving ourselves, and this is a trap in the GUI NGL. We don't want a nuclear program anywhere, not least in Iran, and we've got catastrophic violations of human rights in Iran. We've got persecution of activists, but to put a stop to the import of Iranian oil to affect the Iranian central bank is just going to impact on the population of the country. It will raise the risk of war in the region. This is the dimension, Lady Ashton, we're talking about. To date, there's no proof of a nuclear program for weaponry in Iran since 2003. The IAEA report has not found any evidence. They've had suggestions by the secret services. So I think we need to pursue real negotiations for a nuclear weapon-free Middle East and peaceful coexistence in the region. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the job for the EU, not trying to make the current situation even more difficult.
Mr. Belder, on behalf of the Union of Europe of Freedom and Democracy, for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, President. Externally and internally, the leadership of the Islamic Republic is under great pressure. Even Khamenei's authority, and he is the clerical leader, that too is under open debate. At the moment is a big opportunity for the international community to dissuade Iran away from its nuclear path. Madam High Representative, you know personally just how difficult it is to have real serious negotiations with Tehran. You tend to find at the moment a closed transatlantic front. This time you will have a closed transatlantic front behind you in 2012. And they are concerned about the situation in the Persian Gulf. The American fleet is heading over there. There's all this talking about war and provocation from Iran. So we need to have a proper inspection regime from the IAEA for Tehran. That's the test case for Tehran, not the other. The Speaker of the Iranian Parliament claimed yesterday. We can see the outlines of the schism in Islam between Sunni and Shiite, and that is reflected in the Middle East as a whole, and that shows what Iran's ambitions are and why it has nuclear ambitions. What are you going to do about it? Thank you.
Mr. Ehrenhauser, from the non-attached members, for 1 minute, please.
Ja, herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. The current Iranian regime is without legitimate and as an Austrian, I cannot call for a nuclear-free Iran. Honestly, there is no evidence, only suppositions of evidence of nuclear weapons program, and they are enriching uranium. But if we were to have a military solution on the basis of the wrong arguments, that is something we should try and prevent. And my question to Lady Ashton is, what is your plan B in the case that the sanctions don't bite? If the sanctions don't achieve the desired effect, what then will you do? Secondly, on Camp Ashraf, the deadline's been put off, the deadline by which it's to be moved. There is the suggestion that asylum should be granted to people from Camp Ashraf in the EU. I wonder whether this is a proposal that's still on the table, and if so, I wonder what you think of it. Thank you very much.
Now we move on to other speakers. First of all, we have Mr. Brok. 2 minutes, please.
Herr Präsident.
Thank you, President. Madam High Representative, ladies and gentlemen. I think that the aims of the resolution, and as we've heard them from, and what we've heard from the High Representative today, fit pretty well with one another. Yes, we must strengthen our sanctions. We must ensure that they are not counterproductive, that they do not lead to solidarity between the people and the regime, but that they have the effect we want. We need to make clear that this regime really is a dictatorship and simply is not applying the rules of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and that appropriate measures and resolutions must be made by the European Union. We need to warn this regime against adventures in the Straits of Hormuz, because it's not in their interest. So our proposals and these sanctions means that we would try to make it clear that the European Union is trying to do things not by military means, that it will not take action before July the 1st, or if there is anything such as attacks on embassies and so on. So is that message to be given through our talks with our partners, Turkey, but there are others, I hope, who will join us too, Russia and China, to make the message all the clearer. I think that our message must be that we don't want to necessarily stabilize this regime, but if we do, we want to make sure at the same time that we don't have to deal with a regime that has nuclear weapons, that has rockets to fire them, and that we hope that they will be willing to cooperate with the international community so that nobody can find a reason to go to war with them.
Anna Gomes for 2 minutes, please.
The Iranian authorities persist in enriching uranium at a suspicious level, incompatible with their stated peaceful civilian purposes. We say that we are strengthening the sanctions, but are we indeed sending strong warnings to all European agents that sanctions are not to be circumvented this time? This is indeed a very dangerous year, with US elections in the horizon and intense saber rattling in hawkish quarters in the US, Israel and even in Europe. The EU should rule out a military solution which could only spell disaster for the region and beyond, Israel up front. And instead, in our dual-track approach, we should consider exploring a broader settlement by all diplomatic means, by recognizing Iran as a regional power and establishing a diplomatic mission in Tehran, by shifting the non-proliferation focus to an internationally controlled fuel bank which Iran could access, and the weapons of mass destruction-free Middle East, by working for regional security and economic arrangements which should include Saudi Arabia and possibly Israel, guaranteeing inviolability of current borders and economic progress for the region, and by sending clear support and solidarity for the Iranian people fighting, namely those fighting for basic human rights, making clear that sanctions are not to be targeted to the people and produce counterproductive effects that would only fuel the opportunistic propaganda of the regime.
Alexander Graf Lambsdorff.
Mr. Lambsdorff, for 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I was delighted at the Council's decision to impose sanctions and embargo to raise pressure on Iran. I think that was the right thing to do. And I'm rather surprised when some colleagues here are saying there is no evidence for military intentions, or that it is impossible to distinguish between military and civilian use. You only need to look at the facts. Iran has 5,000 kilos of uranium enriched to 3%, which is what you require to produce nuclear power, but 75 that's enriched to 50%, and the only possible explanation for that is military use, and you need to push that ahead to 90%. Technically very difficult, but quite far from being impossible. And if you look at the latest reports of the IAEA, then it is clear that there is an attempt to move towards military use. So I think within a time frame that we can foresee that it's going to be a requirement that the EU apply pressure. We've got the rockets. They're working on short and medium range missiles, and that also means that we need to act quickly. The oil embargo would be better if it could be brought in very rapidly. I certainly understand the situation that some member states find themselves in. They need to diversify their imports, but that in turn would give Iran a possibility to seek other outlets. I hope that there will be broad support for the resolution. I think that there is broad support for AEOI, and I look forward to the positive role that Turkey has recently been playing in this issue. Thank you.
Mr. Stevenson, for 1 minute, please.
Mr. President, the lessons of the Arab Spring hold true for Iran just as much as for any oppressive government anywhere in the world. Khamenei, Ahmadinejad and their fascist colleagues in Tehran are not immune to the winds of change that are sweeping across the Middle East. They see the writing on the wall, and that's why they're intensifying their efforts to build a nuclear weapon, so that they can reassert their authority in the region and hold the free world to ransom. We have surely by now recognised the abject failure of our policy of appeasement. Our attempts to appease the mullahs simply provided the regime with time to continue its promotion of terrorism worldwide and its construction of nuclear weapons at home against a background of desperate oppression and human rights abuse. So I welcome tougher sanctions against this brutal terrorist regime in Iran. It's worthy of note that they are one of the few remaining countries who still support Assad in Syria. There's no place for dialogue with these tyrants. Let's work robustly for regime change.
Ms. Lösing, for 1.5 minutes, please.
Atomwaffen
Atomic weapons are among the most gruesome weapons there are and need to be banned throughout the world. The civilian use of nuclear energy is uncontrollable too, so we must do everything we can to have a worldwide atomic moratorium on nuclear power and nuclear disarmament. We have treaties at the moment to deal with that, and it is a criticism of Iraq that are against the criticism of Iran, you can certainly say that unlike India, Pakistan and other nuclear powers, it has signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, so it is entitled to use nuclear energy for civil purposes. But there is a danger here when it comes to other countries. Nobody thinks of trying to ban them from using nuclear power, and that's only right. Nobody thinks about sanctioning them. The latest reports from the IAEA do, however, show that there is a clear intention to design and build nuclear weapons in Iran. And for many years now we've heard the drums of war beating against Iran. At the same time, when we need to stabilise the country, this is a very dangerous policy for world peace, and it restricts the possibilities of progress for a peaceful opposition in Iran. It's peace and human rights that we should support, but they seem to be the victims of the interests of the EU and the US.
Mr. Belder is invoking the green card, the blue card procedure. Mrs. Lösing, will you accept a question from Mr. Belder? Will you take the question?
Will you take a blue card question?
Just one more time, please. I did not hear you.
Mr. Belder is using the blue card procedure. Will you allow him to ask you a question?
Yeah.
Mr. Belder.
Maybe you don't know this, but I'd like to ask you, do you know that the Islamic Republic of Iran has repeatedly threatened the small state of Israel with destruction? Have you ever heard of Israel treating Iran in the same way? I'd like to hear a reaction from you on that. Yeah, obviously I know that, but I don't see what that question has to do with the topic we're discussing at the moment. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mr. Provera. 1 minute, please. Thank you, Mr. President. Lady Ashton, it's difficult to be optimistic, I think. The possession of nuclear weapons by Tehran would gravely destabilise the area between the Mediterranean and the Caucasus, and could give rise to an arms race in the neighbouring countries who, for various reasons, fear Tehran, such as Saudi Arabia or Turkey. The most recent missiles which Iran could get hold of could actually hit bits of the EU, Greece, Cyprus, Romania, and they could even try to make good on their threat to destroy Israel. They could also block the Straits of Hormuz and would make, of course, any kind of political or military countermeasures very dangerous. We can't allow a new North Korea to spring up in the Middle East. Obviously what Europe's been doing has been positive, but time is running out to find a diplomatic solution to the crisis and avoid the military option. Thank you very much. Mr. Obermayr for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Emergency rules to stop imports of oil to the EU being discussed, with the boycott of oil companies in Iran is something which we need to deal with. In the very short term, the EU embargo is going to impact on the civilian population. In the medium term, they're going to be able to find different outlets to cover up the lack of purchase of oil from the EU. I think the oil boycott is therefore not going to bring about the desired effect, and the EU geopolitically is going to find itself in a difficult position. I think we need to think about Iranians in exile who are warning that oil measures are the wrong way to go. The EU, I think, needs to impact or bring about efforts to do this in a more moderate way. Obviously, we've got to guarantee at the same time the security of Israel.
Mr. Preda, for 1.5 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. President. My group, the EPP, welcomes the decision taken on the 23rd of January to enact sanctions against Iran. After the prevention of many businessmen from carrying out activities, the fuel sector steps that have been taken, the logical next step would be to try to stop Iran exporting some of its oil. These steps are never taken lightly, but they're very significant in the case of Iran because of the danger of nuclear proliferation, because of its nuclear research program. I think therefore it's important that the EU has shown a strong hand here, and our firm tone and the sanctions will give a clear signal to the Iranians that we are not going to permit them to continue their nuclear program. Those people who think that sanctions are counteractive, I would say to them that they have indeed already stopped Iran from equipping itself with a nuclear bomb, and Iran has also, on the other hand, shown that these sanctions are having an effect on their economy. So we can, I think, hope that sanctions will bring Iran back to the negotiating table. Thank you, President.
Mr. Fox.
Mr. President, Preda agrees with me.
Mr. Preda. Mr. Preda.
Fox.
Mr. Fox is using the blue card to ask you a question. Do you accept the question, sir? Yes, Mr. Fox, go ahead.
Thank you. Does Mr. Preda agree with me that the gravest threat to peace in the Middle East and the Gulf region is a nuclear-armed Iran, and therefore maintaining the threat of military action is vital in ensuring they comply with the will of the international community?
Cred că, dacă am înțeles bine întrebarea, avem același punct de vedere.
I think that we're really actually on the same wavelength there, Mr. Fox, if I've understood your question correctly. President, the next speaker is Kathleen VAN BREMPT, who has 2 minutes, please.
Mevrouw Ashton.
Lady Ashton, you will see that you have very broad support across party boundaries for your position on the position of the European Union. I think that the stubbornness of the Iranian regime, and that's pretty much of an understatement, you are planning to adopt very tough sanctions. There are strong feelings involved here. You know, we hear from a lot of experts of examples of where sanctions have actually led to regime change. So maybe you should take those with a pinch of salt, but we need to bear them in mind. Apart from that, an important point regarding this debate here, I and my whole group are of the opinion that these sanctions are not a step on the road to military intervention or armed conflict in the region and in Iran itself. We must make that clear. I think that we need the military threat to make sure that we're baring our teeth here. I think that a military conflict would be a bad thing for that region, for Iran and for Europe, and it's not really an option. Secondly, in a broader context, I was very interested to hear you say something that causes me a lot more concern. That's the situation of the people in Iran, the human rights in Iran. And there, really, we can look to ourselves. There are a lot of European Union companies that are using technology, they're selling their technology to the Iranian government to oppress their people. communications technology or other kinds of technology used to bug people's telephones, or, for example, to prevent them from accessing internet. And there too, we've got to keep our own house in order, I think, Lady Ashton, and I hope that you will do the necessary in the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Van Brempt. Our next speaker is Ms Parvanova. 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Chair, Madam High Representative, dear colleagues. The situation in Iran emphasizes more than ever that the Iranian nuclear program has to be addressed effectively by the international community. And let's also not forget about ongoing issues such as the permanent violation of human rights in this country. We should once again call on Iranian authorities to cooperate fully with the IAEA on all issues, particularly those raising concern about the possible military dimension of the Iranian nuclear program. This includes an access without delay to all sites, equipment, persons and documents requested by the agency. The European Union has been taking a pragmatic and straight approach when it comes to sanctions against Iran. Madam High Representative, should sanctions not deliver on their objectives, could you elaborate on how do you intend to collaborate with Middle East countries, and in particular with Turkey, in advancing towards a workable solution, and how feasible is a direct dialogue EU-Iran? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Parvanova. Our next speaker is Niki TZAVELA for 1 minute, please. Thank you, President. Lady Ashton, I would warmly beg you to keep trying the diplomatic way. It's not certain that the diplomatic way has yet failed with Iran. It's a country which has a very rich history. We should respect that. And there are 3 points. There is a question about the involvement of Russia. Where is the pressure being exerted? Who is going to be affected in Iran? Who is going to take the ultimate decisions, the elite or the ordinary people? There's also the question of sanctions on energy. We're talking about something which might take a long time to take effect. We are seeing that energy consumption is going up all over the planet. We need to bear those things in mind before we embark on a process which could give rise to severe economic problems, not just in Europe but throughout the world. So please don't forget the diplomatic road. Thank you very much, says the President. Our next speaker is Diane DODDS. 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, High Representative. It is quite right that governments across the world are deeply concerned at Iran's nuclear programme and the threat to global security that is posed. As many colleagues have said, this is a brutal regime, not concerned with the human rights of its citizens, and one which has posed a constant threat to the State of Israel and contributes to the tinderbox situation in the Middle East. It is therefore quite right that appropriate sanctions are put in place in order to encourage Iran to enter into negotiations. A further escalation of the nuclear programme, which is undoubtedly about developing nuclear weapons, or attempts at acts such as closing the Strait of Hormuz, would it be entirely unacceptable. I welcome the resolution of the international community in this matter. The decision by the UK, the US and French governments in sending warships and the aircraft carrier through the waters of the Straits of Hormuz sent the right signal. It is important that we have one voice and the resolve to stand together to protect the safety of our citizens. But these must not only be about dialogue and diplomacy. We need to retain that threat that actually we will take action if this continues.
Our next speaker is Ms Kolarska-Bobinska for 2 minutes, please.
Mr. President, Baroness Ashton, I think that we are entering now a new and extremely difficult phase in our relation with Iran, or rather in our lack of relations with Iran. The report of the International Atomic Energy Agency confirms that Iran has the knowledge and the desire to develop nuclear weapons. Iran has repeatedly tried to hide from the IAEA the truth of its actions and impede the work of its inspectors, as this is taking place now. Internationally, Iran has threatened us with military actions against our allies and to block the Strait of Hormuz. Internally, we see more and more repression with democratic movements, which really concerns us. And there is no hope that the March elections in this country will bring about any changes in that policies. Therefore, the European Union has no choice but to act, and it was right to impose sanctions. And the current threats from Iran make it clear that we can no longer support this undemocratic regime simply by buying their oil. And right now we have to put a pressure on Iran to fully engage in negotiations. These negotiations cannot be just talk or shame in order to play more time, but to stop and clear the nuclear program. And Mrs. Ashton, you should not accept anything else than a real talk and real exchange of opinions. We can only begin the talk about the renewal of the importation of Iran resources when Iran will apply the resolution of United Nations and International Atomic Energy suggestions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mrs. Koppa for 2 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. President. Our debate in this afternoon's setting is very important, High Representative. The new sanctions against Iran are very significant, but also it's important that we exhaust every other means of trying to get Iran back to the negotiating table. The decision to impose sanctions, even if it was necessary, wasn't easy. We have the question of oil, and the choking off of that could give rise to problems for many countries. The economic cost of that, in the light of the crisis which we're all going through, would be extremely high. And don't forget that Iran could always sell its oil on other markets rather than on the European market. There's another even more important point. We need to make sure that the sanctions are targeted and do not hurt the Iranian people excessively. So, as I said, Lady Ashton, please exhaust every diplomatic method you can to deal with the question of Iran's nuclear program. But it shouldn't just be the nuclear program. The international community and Europe needs to look at the terrible state of human rights in Iran. You should remind Tehran and try to raise their awareness on that issue. It's in no one's interest to have any kind of raising of the temperature or clash with the Arab world. It's important that we look at the possible closing of the Straits of Hormuz, which would escalate the situation even more. But Iran needs to look at peaceful ways of sorting out the problems caused by its nuclear program, and none of those things, of course, are going to be easy. The President, thank you very much, Mrs. Koppa. Our next speaker is Mr. Griffin for 1 minute, please.
Weapons of mass destruction. Remember how politicians and media liars queued up to demand action against Iraq over WMDs. That propaganda lie justified sanctions and an illegal war. MEPs who voted for sanctions against Iraq over those non-existent WMDs might have meant well, but they helped to murder hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children who died through lack of food and medicine. Now it's nuclear weapons of mass destruction. It's a new target, Iran. But the main victims will be the same, the children, because a successful oil and banking embargo would make it impossible for Iran to buy enough food and medicine for its population. If the EU votes for sanctions, it exposes itself as bankrupt, not merely financially, but morally too. If Saudi Wahhabis and Zionist neocons want war with Iran, that's their business. But it's not ours, and we should stay out of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, before asking you whether are you ready to answer for a blue card, I should like to greet everybody on the occasion that is the first time that I am chairing the meeting. And later on, I will use my mother language. To answer for a blue card.
That Mr. Griffin has a liking for Iran with its existential threats to the State of Israel. The word neocons and Zionists was a bit of a giveaway, I'm afraid, and that's where I'm afraid he and his party come from politically. But I wanted to ask him a more serious question relevant to the debate. If he believes that Iran is pursuing a peaceful option for its nuclear program, what on earth does it need 20 or even 50% enriched uranium for?
Yes, thank you. Are we on?
Griffin, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you. I'm no friend of Iran's. I'm very critical of Islam and all things Islamic and the Islamic threat to Europe. But as regards the Middle East, that's the affairs of the countries of the Middle East. It's not for us to interfere in. And when the Iranians look at what happened to Libya, which didn't have effective weapons, you really can't blame them for wanting to defend themselves if that's what they're doing. But weapons of mass destruction, we heard the lies before, and I think we're hearing the lies again. Thank you.
Thank you. Next to speak is Mr. Schöpflin in a minute and a half. Thank you, President. I'd like to congratulate to you. I'll continue in English.
President, High Representative, Iran's nuclear program is, I think, without any question, a source of potential danger for the wider West Asian region. But we should not allow ourselves to be mesmerized by the nuclear issue, because that way we run the risk of missing several other strategic developments. For one, Iran is a major power in conventional military terms. Indeed, militarily, it hardly needs nuclear weapons. Second, Iran has the potential to block the Straits of Hormuz. This has already been mentioned. This would affect oil exports from the entire Gulf region, I want to stress that, and it would involve around a fifth of the world's oil consumption. Then, with Iraq gradually evolving into an Iranian satellite, Tehran's power has increased markedly. The uprising in Syria, another of Iran's allies, directly affects Iran's interests, hence the support extended to the Assad regime. In all, it is not hard to see the ultimate objective of Iran's strategy: control of the Gulf, the neutralization of Saudi Arabia, and the exclusion of the United States from the region. The nuclear question is only a part of these strategic issues.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Weidenholzer in 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, President. The Middle East is a cause of concern for Europe and the West, and we're trying to decide whether we're going to see a peaceful development into the future. And there's a lot at stake. The current Iranian government is doing what it can to make the situation more tense. Threats against the existence of Israel, the support of terrorist activities in the region, amongst others. Repeatedly, the people have been warning, whereas this has been ignored, and a diplomatic solution is one that has been spurned. I think we're trying to proceed in a logical and consistent manner in the EU, but if you look at the policies of Iran and use a carrot and stick approach, then that I think is most likely to be successful. But we're using more stick than carrot at the moment, and I think we really got to think about using a bit more carrot and a little less stick. I think we need to help strengthen the opposition in Iran and put the regime under further pressure. In order to be consistent and coordinate European policy, it's important to try and prevent anything which would push the conflict in the direction of war and ratchet up tensions. If you think of historic examples on this continent, then you won't struggle to find them. Devastating wars for the population of Iran and for the region and for Israel in particular would damage and put the situation back decades. And I think it's important in that context to do whatever we can to prevent a situation of war coming about. War is not an answer after all.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Ms. Andrikiene in a minute and a half.
Thank you, Mr. President. I welcome the EU decision to place an embargo on Iranian oil imports, ban new contracts, freeze Iranian central bank assets, because recent EU decision, coupled with existing American measures, will come close to imposing crippling sanctions, I quote Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. It is important to note that the EU as a bloc is Iran's second largest customer, taking about a quarter of Iranian exports. And the latest set of EU and US sanctions goes beyond targeting the persons and institutions involved in the nuclear program. Hopefully, those sanctions will reach their aim, but the more important is that the EU member states are perfectly aware of the possible consequences, and respective governments are prepared to deal with them. European Parliament in its resolution makes a strong statement in support of the EU's dual-track approach for the negotiations with Iran, which offers both rewards and punishments. What is clear is that we are far away from trusting the current Iranian regime, and at the same time we wish Iran would have to become a country like Japan, which has the capability to become a nuclear power quickly if need be, but has rejected taking the final steps to possessing nuclear weapons. Finally, in this context, what could give negotiations and diplomacy a chance, that is ever-changing events in Iran and in the region, including the move towards democracy in the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you. The next is Mr. Kutash in 2 minutes.
Domnule președinte, stimată doamnă.
Thank you. Lady Ashton, my dear colleagues. Iran is in a very vulnerable and sensitive part of the world. If there were chaos in Iran, there would be a greater threat to peace in that region. But that's also, of course, a way of controlling its neighbours for Iran. I think that we should have clarity about what Iran's intentions are. We need to ask the right questions. Will sanctions against Iran produce the results we want? I don't think that we should punish the people, the society of Iran, for the faults of those who govern them. Sanctions must be targeted against those who are holding power in Iran, and I think it's necessary to be constantly monitoring the effects of the sanctions and to evaluate them. The EU must keep close tabs on that. And as I've already said, or has been said, we must also use our relationship with Turkey. We can't just be concerned about the nuclear problem in Iran. There's also the human rights problem, as many of my colleagues have already said. And when it comes to human rights, I think that the European Union must try to ensure that its businesses, when they export their products, I think in particular of electronics, keep an eye on what happens to them. I think that we need to keep our eye on this very tense situation in the hope that there will be a peaceful solution. A military action, as I say it, would be a major error with terrible consequences. And thanks to its representatives, the European Union can show that it is firmly against any military action and must say that it's open to dialogue. Thank you.
I thank you. The next is Mr. Kaczmarek in a minute and a half.
Panie Przewodniczący, Pani Wysoka Przedstawiciel, Szanowni Państwo.
Thank you very much, Madam High Representative, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think there's any doubt that the European Parliament has to speak out on the atomic program of Iran. It wasn't we, but the IAEA that expressed concerns and fears of the military aspects of the atomic program, and I think there is proof that they are moving towards the construction of atomic weapon. I think the non-proliferation treaty having been signed by Iran, that country therefore has the responsibility to report its nuclear activities and also the transit of any nuclear material. The Security Council in its resolution 1929 of 2010 called on Iran to do its bit. It was the Iranian government, however, that threatened the peace and stability of the region, not us. I would ask the High Representative to ensure that she doesn't forget the very difficult situation in Camp Ashraf, as has been mentioned by a number of other colleagues. These are problems that we all need to solve together.
I thank you, and I thank you that you kept within your time slot. The next to speak is Mr. Stasny in a minute and a half.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Iranian refugees from Ashraf will move to a new Camp Liberty, which Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly compared to a prison camp. Green light was issued by UN mission in Iraq. This approval was granted without consent of Ashraf residents, despite promise of UN envoy Ambassador Martin Kobler to do so. EU should take a lot more active role with Mrs. Ashton's direct involvement, especially after being rejected by Iraqi government from taking active part in the negotiations. Additionally, there are approximately 900 Ashraf residents with links to Europe. Therefore, we need to stand shoulder by shoulder with our US friends in exerting pressure on Iraq and the UN for quick and human resolution. By the way, people like refugees of Ashraf are our best hope for democratic and nuclear-free Iran. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You also saved some time. I thank you for that. The last in the list is Mr. Fjellner in 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Lady Ashton, I have to say, I think that the sanctions that the EU have imposed on Iran is a sign of our moral position. I think it's important that we unite behind them. I think doing what Australia has done is another matter. I think the support has been great, and I would expect that to be the case. I don't think that what's happening is a sign of a lack of success. It's a sign that these sanctions are having consequences. I don't understand those that are against them. I've met and spoken with members of the Iranian opposition, and they want us to be tough against Iran, not to punish the population, but the actions of the regime, which has led to consequences, and they've behaved unreasonably and against the international community's unified position. This has to have consequences. It costs, it must cost, and our sanctions show that we mean it, so that we should welcome them. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, whose eye I caught is Mr. MÖLZER. Sir, the floor is yours.
Very often we say that the EU needs speaking in a more united voice in foreign affairs. Therefore, it is welcome that member states that suffer from economic difficulties and that do import oil from Iran managed to reach an agreement on the sanctions on Iran. This is a very serious signal to the government of Iran. And these oral statements by the Iran government are not justified and they are not convincing. Therefore, the policy of the EU, of this two-mode policy, remains, and it will determine whether the Iran economy will suffer more restrictions. One of the main aims is to eliminate the threat on security and safety in the Middle East. It is a pity that some countries that have global ambitions do not manage to step on the same track as the other countries, I mean Russia here, and they do not manage to reach agreement with them.
Thank you. Thank you. The next is Ms. Flašíková-Beňová. In 1 minute.
Well, thank you very much for the floor, Chairman. Madam Ashton, colleagues, it is quite unquestionable that Iran in the field of nuclear activity doesn't fulfill with its international obligations. If we have to respect these obligations, if they have any meaning at all, then we have to have the power to pursue them. And therefore we fully underline and fully support the procedure which European Union has adopted towards Iran. On the other hand, it is important to underline the fact that these sanctions should be targeted towards the key representatives of the regime, not towards common citizens of Iran, who have very complicated life anyway. Apart from that, there is also a second dimension, and this second dimension is the diplomatic negotiations with Iran. I am convinced that if we will pursue in this direction also in other fields, if we will manage to convince them about the fact that we are really interested in a correct partnership with countries such as Iran, not with its leadership, but with the country itself, only then we will succeed in being successful also in the field of control of nuclear proliferation in Iran. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next to speak is Mr. Angourakis.
Mr. President, the embargo on oil exports and other sanctions adopted by Council show that the steps taken against Iran are escalating. This will simply exacerbate the energy crisis we already have in the European Union. We can't act as a kind of world policeman, Madam High Commissioner. We need to look at the ramifications of what we do on other countries near the Persian Gulf and the Middle East. We need to look at what Iran is doing with its nuclear program. What about Israel? They are developing their own nuclear weapons. We have nuclear weapons in many states here in Europe, so do India and Pakistan. I'm sure that working people will condemn these steps. We need to look at countries such as Israel before we start thinking about declaring war on Iran. It's vital that the European Union give way to people's power so we don't go spilling more blood in imperialist wars. Thanks very much.
There is a blue card again. Are you ready to
I accept,
answer?
yes.
Please, Mr. Tannock.
President, I have to say I'm sick and tired of people comparing the Iranian quest for nuclear weapons to what's happening in Israel or Pakistan or even India. Israel is not a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Neither of the other two countries. Iran is. Iran is in violation of its international obligations. Mr. Angourakis talks about being a world policeman. Well, the Security Council is indeed the world policeman and in charge of global security. So what is wrong with Iran being forced to adhere to its international obligations, I ask Mr. Angourakis.
Will you so kind to answer?
Yes, Mr. President.
Mr. Tannock, I was actually really, in a way, thinking about the country that you come from, the UK. That is a nuclear power, and it basically wants to make certain that there's a nuclear club that no one else is allowed to join. And also, the European Union, as I've said, is trying to appoint itself a world policeman because by itself it seems to think it's the guardian of international law and it has the right to levy sanctions against other countries.
Mölzer úr,
Mr. Mölzer in 1 minute.
Nur allzu leicht kann der Embargo-Beschluss der
The embargo decision could bring about a difficult situation. If we see a stop on deliveries, then Spain, Italy and Greece would be the countries that would be affected, and that would these countries are also suffering under debt problems. With the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important world oil routes, would push us into a real crisis. Weapons of mass destruction, as has been said before, were used as an excuse for an attack in the past, and if there is we get an atomic dispute turning into a nuclear into an oil dispute, then that itself could have devastating effects. Preventive military attacks to try and put a stop to the building of nuclear weapons is to be rejected. We have to think about how the security of Israel under these circumstances could be guaranteed.
Thank you. The last speaker in the Catch the Eye procedure is Mr. Rübig.
Thank you. I think that this is an important debate for all of us because you know, the European model has separated away from the war model and headed for the peace model, talks. So we need to look for the right partners in Iran, people willing to talk to us. And I know there are plenty of them in Parliament in Iran who are not in agreement with the current policy of their government. And I think it is a matter of urgency to say that cooperation is always the basis and for the potential future peaceful cooperation, and trade is the basis of democracy, because of course friendship in sport, culture and so on, that means allowing and tolerating other opinions. So I think it's important to promote this kind of debate among the people of Iran. We don't need sanctions against the citizens of Iran. What we need is sanctions against those who are misusing these rights.
Thank you.
Summarize or answer for the different problems.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. Honourable members, I think this has been an important debate, and I've listened with great care to all of the contributions that have been made. I will, if I might, just try and bring together some of the themes that have been expressed in this House and to take them forward as part of our thinking about how to effectively deal with this extremely important issue of the nuclear aspirations of Iran. A number of colleagues, beginning with Mr. Salafranca in his the first contribution, talked about the need to work with others to ensure that we are collaborating with our allies, not just, but of course including those that we call the E3+3, Russia, China, United States, as well as the UK, France and Germany, the 6 countries who, when we do find ourselves in dialogue with Iran, sit behind me as the E3+3 designated by the Security Council. But we're of course talking not only with them. I saw the State Councillor Dai Bingwol of China when I was in India the week before last. As I say, we are constantly talking with Russia. The political director is there currently, but also with other countries like Japan and Korea, with the ambition of ensuring that the gap created by EU sanctions is not filled in ways that mean that there would not be an effect on the regime. A number of colleagues have mentioned the role of Turkey, and I of course keep in close contact with Foreign Minister Davutoglu on this issue. Turkey has provided a conduit of information and dialogue to Iran, of being the reinforcer of messages, but of course also was the host of the last round of talks. And I do pay tribute to the way in which they have worked with us on this issue. I will be going to Brazil this weekend for a number of discussions, but one of them, of course, will be on what we're doing on Iran and why. And I take very much the points that have been made about strengthening and broadening the understanding of what the EU is doing and the reasons behind our actions, and the need for the international community to stand together to seek a satisfactory resolution of that. So in all our discussions across the world, we keep this on the agenda. We keep making the point that the sanctions are important. Their purpose is to try and persuade Iran to come to negotiations, a twin-track approach specifically designed in that way. The second area I just want to touch on was effects on the people of Iran. We are very clear that what we are seeking to do is to persuade the regime that it needs to come to the talks. I'm very worried about their capacity economically in Iran, a country that should have been able to grow economically. And I do keep watch over what we do to try and ensure that the effects on the people of Iran are minimal, but that they also understand what it is we're doing. And as has been said, there are many people in Iran who share the aspiration that we have to see Iran turn away from this path. It's also true that we look with our member states to see the effect on the European Union. In all the work we do on sanctions, it is vital that we ensure that what we're doing we understand and that we look at the effect that it has. National legal systems are responsible to ensure there is no circumvention, but the EU as a whole works together in this way. Colleagues too, of course, mentioned the fact that Camp Ashraf has an Iranian population, and I've already mentioned a couple of times in our question hour the importance that we attach to trying to find a satisfactory resolution for the people of Camp Ashraf. My concern is straightforward, is to try and find a way in which we can keep them completely safe and give them a future. There are members of the UN in discussion with member states where there are issues of citizenship. There are the members of the High Commission for Refugees who are engaged with this, and Martin Kobler, who, as I've indicated already, will be here tomorrow. We work closely with the US, we work closely with the international community, and we keep this on the agenda in our discussions with Iraq. But it is important that we move forward, that the people find a future, not that we simply keep them there because we don't have a plan. There does seem to be, not a perfect plan, a compromise solution, of course, but one in which, if we do it properly, I believe there is the potential for future for these people that will keep them safe, which, as I've said, is our final objective. My final point was this, something that Mr. Tannock said about the glorious Persian culture. Absolutely. We are clear in this House and right across the European Union that our quarrel on this issue is not with the people of Iran. We wish them well. We wish to see this glorious Persian history and culture rise and be part of the region and part of the international community. But we have obligations as countries, as a European Union. The obligations are that when people sign up to the treaties and say they will not move forward on nuclear proliferation, they are taking on obligations that they have to respect, and if they don't respect, we have to do something about it. It's all done within the Security Council. It is back to the Security Council that these issues go, and the Security Council who give my mandate and with whom the European Union works. But I do hope that we will have the support to make sure that these sanctions are seen as being an important contribution to getting the other track moving, and through this medium, as I do in any other, I ask the Iranians to respond to my letter, to pick up what I left on the table, or to come forward with their own ideas and come back to talks.
Köszönöm szépen.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, we have 6 motions for resolutions as a completion of the debate. I thereby close the debate. Vote would be held tomorrow at 12 o'clock. The next point on the agenda to be dealt with is a statement by the Vice President of the Commission and High Representative on the situation in Russia. Madam, the floor is yours.
President. Mr. President, when societies change, political systems need to change too. More often than not, making these changes is less risky and uncertain than not making them. Honourable members will recall that we debated Russia in our Strasbourg session on the 13th of December, and the concerns that were raised in this House about the Duma elections were raised with President Medvedev at our summit that followed shortly afterwards. You will recall that those concerns focused in particular on the exclusion of parties from the elections. President Medvedev talked to us about those concerns and explained that a necessary political evolution was taking place. He said this was due to increased living standards, a more active civil society and the development of social media, and he emphasised that the government was drawing lessons. Now, honourable members, some limited political reforms have been launched, and yet the protests that began in December we see are set to continue. The movement has grown. We can expect a large mobilisation this Saturday, the 4th of February. The tandem announcement in September that they would swap jobs again between President and Prime Minister made many Russian citizens feel that things were being decided between only 2 people over the heads of voters. There is a rising group of people calling for real participation, for more decisive measures, to rein in corruption and impunity, and to give more breathing space to democratic processes. And they are ready to express that opinion peacefully. But nevertheless, they want to see real change. And OSCE observers have raised real issues about registration, about access to electronic media, and the lack of separation between state and governing party. We move forward to engage in dialogue with the protesters and, of course, the opposition. Honourable members, the next benchmark will be the presidential elections on the 4th of March. We welcome that the invitation has been extended again to the OSCE and others to observe these elections. But this time expectations will be higher. Regrettably, issues of registration have appeared for the presidential elections too. I call on the responsible authorities to review as a matter of urgency the decision not to register Grigory Yavlinsky. The Russian leadership should now act swiftly on the problems identified by the OSCE and do its utmost in the short time left to hold free and fair presidential elections next month. Mr. President, Russia and the EU face challenges also on the international scene. Recently, differences have emerged over how to deal with the growing crisis in Syria. With thousands of people killed and violence escalating across Syria, we strongly urge Russia to join the international consensus and allow the Security Council to act on the basis of the Arab League proposals and the joint draft resolution. It is true that Russia disagreed with the international community's approach to Libya and said that action taken went beyond the mandate given by the Security Council. I have discussed this with the Foreign Minister of Russia, Mr. Lavrov, several times. But it's also clear that we cannot let the Syrian people pay the price for past disagreements. Syria is a case of its own, and the solution proposed by the Arab League is different from Resolution 1973. As a permanent member of the Security Council, Russia needs to take its responsibilities for international peace and security seriously. Old alliances may matter, but the fate of the people of Syria matters much more. This being said, experience suggests that we managed pretty well to find common ground on international affairs, be it in the Middle East Quartet or indeed in the E3